Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm so good. I wish it were Christmas every day.
Yeah, as I say, it's holy shit! It's another Christmas. Yes, we are going to be talking about the Black Christmas special. I think this is the last thing I think really associated or generated by Channel 4 before it moves to Netflix. It's called White Christmas, and this was almost like an anthology within a single story. I think is a way to describe it. I'll say if it's whether it's well done or not. It says it's 3 interconnected tales of technology run amok during the Christmas season are told by 2 men at a remote outpost in a frozen wilderness. It stars John Hamm, Rafe Spall as the 2 main characters you'd probably recognise, and everybody else is just basically a bit player. So I think we'll stick with those because they're 2 of the main characters. So let us start then with White Christmas. I do want to we'll split it into. Is it worth splitting it into 3? Well, they sort of connect. I think they connect, don't they? So
yeah, they do. I mean, but I mean, we could make some global thoughts at first. I mean, what's your overall impression of the episode?
I like it. I like the idea of it. And I like the fact it interconnects. I think it's I like a good portmanteau kind of story. And so I like the framing of this. I like the way it sort of works as a sort of an anthology within itself. So no, I kind of liked it. There are things within the stories that bothered me and felt a little. It relies a little bit on past stories from season 1 and season 2 a little bit that kind of irked me. But overall, I thought it was all right. I thought it was good. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think that it does have a little bit of that sort of self-referentiality. But that doesn't bother me. It does sort of make me wonder. I sort of wonder if this episode is set within the universe of one of those other episodes. But yeah, I don't know. But my recollection of this was worse than watching it again. And I sort of remembered feeling like, well, that was a nothing burger. And sort of feeling like that doesn't really make sense and let down by it. And watching it again, I thought, no, actually, I quite like it. I don't think I love it, but I quite like it. And I think, each of the stories is interesting. And I think that shorter format works for Brooker in a way that you would not expect.
Yes, I agree with that. It feels sharper a little bit. I think there's less of sort of. It forces him to be a little bit more punchy, which I do think I appreciate. But I also think it forces him to add in some ambiguity. Because he can't expound on much more, so that there's more ambiguity, and I think that is actually to the benefit of the stories.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. So I think that, yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so you finish, because let's get into the stories. But have you any other thoughts about the wider piece?
Well, one thing is, in terms of guest stars, and maybe this is because I'm an American, I like John Hamm, and it's
Hmm.
really fun watching John Hamm. And he's been in stuff where, I don't think it's the best performance, or I don't like what he's in, or think he's miscast, but he's still, you know, interesting to watch. And so, it's sort of fun watching John Hamm right from the
Yeah,
start.
yeah. No, I'd agree with that. I think what I like actually about the two main headers of this, uh, you know, John Hamm versus Rafe Spall, is John Hamm is he's very good. He's very charismatic, very charming. You and I are both fans of Mad Men, and he has that sort of matinee idol sort of good looks. Like he's a very sort of good looking man, very tall, very sort of whatever. Rafe Spall is your everyman. He's a very sort of British actor. He's done quite a lot over here for television and stuff. He's been in a couple of films, but again, he's another actor I really like because I like Rafe Spall. He does really good work, but he plays that everyman, like usually quite downtrodden, very well. And he's done that a few times. So yeah, no, to see these two together, I'm pleased. I think this is a good um it's a good setup, and it's sort of like when I see these two, it's these two going to be telling a story. I'm like, cool, I'm in for that. So yeah.
Well, so let's back up and sort of describe the setting. The setting is a cabin in a field of snow,
Hmm.
right? And so nobody ever goes outside in the story. And presumably these two characters have been there together for 5 years. You're told that. And yet the everyman character seems unclear whether it's a prison or a punishment at some point. He makes this kind of, it's not really clear that they know why they're there or if they've really been there 5 years. I mean, obviously something is askew. And the John Hamm character begins to tell the first story,
Yeah.
which is about, using that, was it the Z eyes from the entire history of you? It seems, very similar if,
Yeah.
and he's on the other end watching what this guy is doing, giving him dating advice, right? With a screen of people advising him too.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
which
no,
makes me
no,
wonder, how
no.
much do you pay for this service? Because there's a lot of people contributing
Well, it's
input.
not. Yeah, it's not. This is what I thought was most interesting. Actually, I thought they were like a consortium, like a consulting group. But then what's actually made clear throughout the episode, and then eventually is completely clarified towards the end, but is sort of made clear in the story. They are all the same as that guy. So the guy that you're following, he has to crash a Christmas party, and I love the idea of this. By the way, I think it's you know, this idea of just walking in with confidence. Because the amount of times I've been to Christmas
Yeah.
parties and I've gone like, I have no idea half the people that are here. Fine, but all those have done exactly the same. They've all been on first dates and they've all got to watch those other people. So it's almost like they're like a group that's all
Mm.
clubbed into one. And John Hamm's character is like the guru. He's like your Cyrano de Bergerac, sort of like, telling you sort of how and what to say. And but because one of them, he says, no, I want to see this guy get laid. Like I want to see him having sex. He got to see me get sucked off on that first episode, on that first date. So tit for tat sort of thing. So I think that's how it works. Is they're all in it together, sort of thing. Which again I kind of like. I think it's interesting that there's just a bunch of men, using technology. Would I say it's taken advantage? No, but obviously it doesn't end well. But
Well, they're taking advantage of the technology
yeah,
in order to maybe take advantage of women. I mean, obviously it's inspired by these sort of, love guru kind of, dating advice types. And I've walked into so many areas I'm not supposed to be in because I've walked through with confidence. And, I mean, I've walked into areas where I'm supposed to pay without paying. Nobody stops me. I've walked into secure areas, nobody
yeah,
stops me. But so I totally get that. But, obviously this was before the whole incel thing. And so the idea of, men going to sort of like, this is post Magnolia, right? And the sort of,
Yeah.
that really, paved the way for a lot of it, or predicted a lot of it. It was still going on then, but it sort of became this big industry
Mm.
of,
Well, it's what's
ways to
interesting
get
is
laid.
yeah, but what's interesting is it seems to have split, doesn't it? Like you said about the incel, this sort of idea of like
Mm.
chosen celibacy, and then at the other end of the spectrum, I don't know if you've ever heard of Andrew Tate. He definitely seems more of an issue over here than elsewhere, but he's like of that I'm the alpha male.
Mm.
It's to treat people like crap. Is to be an alpha male is to treat everybody else like crap, and that's how you get people to women to love you. And you then, you basically sort of like seduce these women and get them ensnared, and then treat them like crap because that's what a man does. And that's the other end, and I think that's that other thing because this idea of walking in with confidence and stuff. It's a fine line between confident, arrogant, and then just being a prick. So.
Well, and we have the same sort of thing over here. There are a lot of these kind of like, the whole alpha thing is like very, very toxic. Which actually, that sort of toxic behavior is correlated to low testosterone and massive male insecurity. But, they think it makes you alpha and not, a big sign that actually you're beta.
Yeah.
But, okay. But we have the same kind of toxic shit over here. Yeah. I think the incel shit is seen over here as more like that stuff and more into that stuff. And in incel communities, which is involuntary celibate, right? So they're angry. There's a lot of stuff about like women should be property and distributed, and they only respect, an alpha male who treats them like shit. And so, you do have that kind of stuff in those incel communities that have, not all of them, but there are these incel bulletin boards and stuff that are really toxic. But then you do have these kinds of like, dating advice stuff, that's a lot more acceptable,
Yeah, and
a
this
lot less
seems
toxic.
although this I would say although the setup is probably is questionable, and I would say it's an taking advantage of technology, and then is obviously perving on the final solution. The advice that he's giving isn't that thing like when he's telling how to dress. It's like no, like not boring blue. Like you're going to wear. Basically, you're going to dress like John Hamm in Mad Men. You're going to wear like sort of like a nice, cut suit and this and that. You're going to look sharp. And then when he's saying like talk to her, he's not saying neg her or give her a negative compliment, insult her. He's like, right, have some empathy, be witty, look her in the eye. Like it's actually, he's saying confident. Like he's saying, look, just be confident in what you're doing. Like he even suggests like you can make a fuck up, but if you're confident about it, you can get out of it, sort of thing. It's more about that than trying to be obnoxious and horrible. So I think it seems like relatively innocuous or very sort of not harmful, but advice. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the advice is very much in that romantic kind of category, such as engage the friend and not the one you're interested in, right?
Yeah.
The sort of classic thing, which, could work or not, but then there is this advantage that you have of looking people up online in real time and having the answers fed in your ear, which is definitely
yes,
sort
I
of
agree.
taking advantage and able to trick people, right? I mean, literally, he doesn't do it with one of the girls, but he tricks the guy into thinking that they did meet before and he belongs to the company or knows somebody, which is obviously a trick. So had he done that to one of his romantic targets, so to speak, you might feel a little differently about the advantage.
No, that's a very good point. All right, there's an element of manipulation in going on, and that's a very good point. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that, like, obviously this is illegal, right? Because he, we find out, he burns the stuff at the end, but then we find out there's some illegality to this, and it's worth pointing out, she has not consented to have her image of sex watched by a screen full of guys who are perfectly open about it. They're going to enjoy it.
Yes. And that's what I'm saying. Like that I agree with that the advantage taken with the technology is definitely where the line is crossed. but yeah, obviously it goes wrong. So he sort of engages her. He thinks she's talking about leaving her job, going to the next stage or going to the next phase.
State, yeah.
Yeah, next state. And she takes him home. And she then, I don't know, tricks him or basically sort of gives him a drink, and it's a poison drink. And because of this situation, a woman dies, and he is poisoned as
and
well.
their client dies too. They're both dead. And I think the thing that's most successful there is a sort of sense of horror of just a date gone bad. I mean, it reminds me of many dates that I've been on, but there's also the sort of interesting, like, it's very coincidental that he meets somebody who's both suicidal and hears voices. But I do like the idea of the technology being interpreted as mental illness, that she sees him talking on his mic to, essentially to himself, she thinks, and interprets it as mental illness like her own, and figures, well, he must want to die too. So I'm not sure that I buy that somebody who's mentally ill would be like, I want to kill myself, and I believe that you have the same mental illness and want to do it too. That strikes me as a little coincidental.
Yeah, well, also this is feeding into that I don't know, the Hollywoodization of schizophrenia and dissociative identity disorder, where you can have a conversation with the voices or your altered personalities. No, that's not how they work. Like, the voices that you hear as schizophrenia are often whispered voices. It's one-off. It's sort of like, that's where the paranoia comes from, because it's not responsive. It's just constant. It's audio hallucinations or visual hallucinations. It's not full-on conversations with the voices in your head. I think this is so I agree. I actually agree with that when she's like, oh, you have it too. And I'm like, I was actually at one point, because of the way she was talking, I thought this was, because this is a Christmas episode, and I thought maybe Charlie Brooker was going to be less cynical for Christmas, not more. I thought you were going to find out that the punchline was that she actually had a group of women sat in a room doing exactly the same thing. And that's what it was all about. And the next state was sort of like moving into a relationship or something like that. And it was going to be, then it was going to be that whole thing of they found out, and it's, I don't know, men are as bad as women and so on and so forth or something. But because that thing of talking, conversing with the voice is played out and not good.
Well, so they have this conversation before they leave the bar, where she says, this will be my last Christmas party with this company, and says, I'm moving on. But I haven't had the courage. I've wanted to do it for a long time. I haven't had the courage. And he says, and he's sort of talking her up, chatting her up, and says, well, you've got to have the courage. I always say yes. And he's playing this sort of alpha thing, and I always say yes. And you can't be scared to jump into cold water. It's just a state change, right? So he's describing it as a state change. I think, I mean, I've seen this before, but I hadn't remembered any of these stories. But watching them again, maybe I remembered it. Pretty confident the first time through. At that point, I'm like, oh, she's going to kill herself. Like, maybe that's because I've dealt with suicidal impulses before in the past, but I'm like, oh, this is bad news. I know, like, state change is not usually something you talk about changing jobs, right? Like, she's a little too off her rocker here. Again, like most of my dates, there comes a moment where I realize I'm with a crazy person.
Would this have been worse? Or I don't know. So, as you said, there's a part of this. Obviously, John Hamm sat back at he's the man at the desk, he's the man at the screen, and he can pull up information about each of these people. And he pulls up names and sort of bits of information, so he's got the advantage in the conversation. If he had managed to pull up her profile information, I don't know, whatever, and there was an indicator that something was off, and he decided not to share that information with the guy, I don't know. I don't know. Is that too obvious? Would that have been too blatant? Because I feel like that would have made John
Yeah.
Hamm more complicit in the eventual, dying.
Yeah, and I think it might have been a little more realistic too.
Mm,
Um, that there's maybe something that shows up in her online profiles, for example, is something like that. But you're right that it threatens to make the twist obvious, although the twist is obvious to me
yeah.
going in. Um, I think for me, this is the weakest of the three sort of inset stories. And I
Yes.
think it plays with the idea that all new technology is going to be used for porn, or for guys to get sex. I mean, it has some interesting ideas, but it's also just relies on this twist of it's really a poisoning murder, combo. Um, and I don't think it works as well as the others.
Well, I think what it is, and what I think this show or this episode or this film, whatever you want to say it is, it's also like building things up, isn't it? Like everything you start to see things in this first one that begins to pay technology that
Mm.
pays off in the later ones.
Hmm.
I mean, does he have the hand rotation thing in the first episode that then we see the Ralph Spall character have?
I know. Yeah, I forget
You
where
do,
that
no,
first
you do, because
occurs.
you say the first time that occurs. No, I think you do. I think
Oh
he
yeah.
does have it. He does have it, and then it because then the blocking comes up with his wife, obviously towards the end. So you start to see that the rotation, which makes me very much think of the entire history of you.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's that. So there's little bits it's sort of building up, isn't it? That sort of technology and stuff. But yeah, I agree that this is probably the weakest of the stories. But leads into, like, obviously this is the only one, because then it leads into John Hamm sort of having a further, like, the conversation back in the wilderness hut progresses, because, like I say, the Rafe Spall character's like, right, okay, well, so that's it. So and he says, well, now you need, and John Hamm's like, well, you need to guess what I do as a day job. Let's talk about that. And so they introduce the second sort of story, and then you get this idea of even more technology. So you've had this idea of him being blocked. So you've been introduced to the blocking technology, in the first one, because his wife blocks John Hamm. Which, should we talk about the blocking technology now, or do you want to talk about it because it primarily sort of fits into the third story, doesn't it?
The
Really?
third one. Right. So yeah, the blocking technology, is I guess at the end of that first story, right?
His
Because
wife blocks
his
him.
wife blocks him. And so that introduces this idea where somebody's replaced with a sort of digitized
Blur.
white silhouette. Yeah, kind of blurry thing. Um, I mean, I do think that this is another one of these moments that's shockingly possible today,
Mm,
where we have augmented reality. Certainly, the idea of creating something like this with augmented reality, especially with all the need for unfortunately, for restraining orders and things like this. Um, yeah, the blocking thing is very interesting.
yeah. It's interesting. I want to discuss it more when we get to the thing, but the idea is
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
not only do you get a white grey blur, like you cannot hear their voices, they cannot hear you. They also see whenever they see you, they see a blur as well.
right. And
So
you sort of have a muffled
yeah,
version, which I wonder, like, I do
like
sort of
the like the
wonder,
like the teacher
yeah,
from Snoopy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you sort of like they're yelling at you,
yeah,
but you don't know, you can't hear the yelling. Um, but it doesn't stop them from hitting you if that's the concern.
yeah,
But I do think it's interesting. But we'll get into it in the
yeah.
third story.
So
In the meantime,
the second
Matt,
story,
played by
yeah,
John Hamm, goes about explaining what he does for a living.
yes. So what he does is they have so the technology is a small disc that is inserted behind the ear, and stays with you for a week, just where a seed would go. So again, touching on that kind of technology from that. That disc is then implanted into what do they call it? Like an egg looking thing.
Oh, an egg.
It
Yeah.
is called an egg. With a,
It's the
with a little
cookie that
a
gets
cookie,
put
thank
in
you.
it.
Yeah. And it has a little blue dot on it. And what that disc is a complete replication of someone's personality. And I'm always a bit funny about this. So it's been there for a week. And it's a complete replication of someone's personality and preferences and that sort of thing. But they portray it as a complete replication of the person's consciousness, sentience. And so when they are placing the egg, they have no sense of feeling, like they have no limbs or appendages. They can't see anything. They just have this ability to do things. And the character he is working on is this woman who has had this procedure done. And then there's a way of making it more acceptable for this consciousness. So they give them a digitized room and a digitized body so they can sit at a desk and do the work.
And the work is to make their real self comfortable and kind of control the smart home, basically, which is a super smart home. I mean, even the toaster is a smart toaster.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very mundane, like set an alarm, sort of provide an update on their diary, make sure their toast is done just right, play their favorite music, whatever, all this kind of stuff. But they have to break that sentience. So they rebel, and so he fast forwards it. He's able to sort of make this digital sentience experience 3 weeks in a matter of seconds. And that hasn't broke them enough. So makes them experience 6 months in a matter of seconds. And what this does, though, is basically inside this digital thing, they experience it for them at normal time, but there is nothing for them to do. They cannot leave. They cannot interact with anything. They are literally sat there. They can't sleep. There's nothing. So they experience just, nothingness for that period of time. It slowly, he says, you can't push them too much because it'll break them and they go a bit wackadoo. So you have to break them just enough. What are your thoughts on this part of the story, or this story?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely kind of have to accept this whole digitized consciousness thing, which I'm fine with, I guess. I wish it were done a little better. I always think, like, how does something plugged over the ear sample all of your brainwaves? Like, you think this would be a little more involved than this. Presumably it has her memories. How did it get those? I mean, I'm always sort of bothered by this too, but you sort of have to buy it. I like the sort of hellish depiction of life inside the egg, right?
Yeah.
And I can certainly see some version of this sort of happening, right? Where we don't see we've had these discussions about past episodes about sort of who sees an AI as a person and is nice to it, and who isn't. And who's just like, that's just code. It might be crying out, please don't hurt me, but it's just code, right? And then you feel like, well, what does that say about me? So all of those issues are brought up here. I think those are, maybe that's one reason why I like this more this time through, is that I relate to it from experience now. And it brings up those issues. Now, I don't think the most efficient way to have a smart house and have your toast done just right is to create a copy of yourself that lives inside an egg and controls your entire house. It seems to me that you can set these things. And also that your preferences would change as you continue to live in the house. And maybe you don't like that music waking you up anymore and you want something else. Presumably you can still tell your other self that, but let's say your other self refuses. Does John Hamm have to come back and torture her again? This does not seem like the most efficient way of accomplishing this. Anyway, so I have complaints, but I'm still fascinated. I still think it's kind of fascinating, and it's still good to me.
I thought this was crap.
Oh, really? All right, have at it.
So I got really. It's one of those again where I'm like, is it the storytelling or is it the idea? Now again, I like this idea. Again, like we've got several Alexas around the house. We've got some preferences sort of lined up for certain things, like blah blah blah. It's pretty basic stuff. But as I've said before, I'm one of those people that says thank you to Alexa because just force of habit, and I fall for the algorithm that presents a voice. But I know it's an algorithm. I am completely comfortable that when that thing is off, there isn't a little Alexa sat inside. Like, this isn't like a Terry Pratchett Discworld novel where there's a little demon sat inside waiting for something to do. There's no consciousness. It doesn't do anything when I'm outside. That it's not twiddling its thumbs waiting for instruction. The problem with this episode to me is, firstly, you say about this downloading of consciousness. This seems like an amazing technology that's being used for utter mundanity, which sort of bothers me. And I'm like, okay, this surely would then be used in much grander things, like Altered Carbon did, kind of technology where you'd slot into different bodies or do other things. And why is this thing not given a full articulated body or whatever? And so I get that. But then from a story point of view, there's a moment when he's explaining this, and it cuts back to the wilderness, and Rafe Spall's character says, like, well, this is horrific. And that's where you say, like, Matt, the John Hamm character, says, so you're one of those. Like, you have empathy. You're a good person. You see this as a being, like, you see, but to me, it's just code. It's just code. It's an algorithm or whatever. But in the story, in this context of you are being shown an actress or a character sat being tortured at a desk. So of course you are not given that ability. That you are told you are being manipulated by the story to feel sorry or feel bad for this, because it is, when you are away, it is literally sat there twiddling its thumbs in a nothingness. There is no off state. It is a consciousness, digitized or not, trapped in a nothingness that can't do anything. And all I kept thinking about as I watched this was, firstly, how manipulative the story was, which just kind of bothered me. But the second point was, it made me think of, in RoboCop 2, where you have all those other people that they're trying to make into RoboCops, and there's like the one that like pulls its helmet off to kill itself, and there's a skull underneath and stuff. Brilliant stuff.
One of my favorite scenes in movie history.
And we'll cover that one day because it's brilliant. But it made me think of that. I'm like, okay, well, how is it that these things have never taken revenge? Why is you're a CEO, right? You're a ruthless, cutthroat person. You're a CEO of a company, and you decide to have this procedure done. And then you try to torture your version by making it sit for 6 months, and it goes, all right, I shall do as I'm told. And then everyone else buggers off. And then you're like, right, lock doors, heating up, carbon monoxide released.
Yes.
Like,
no, I thought about this too.
Wipes out the family. It's like, good, now turn me off. Like, or do something. Like, it feels okay. So it just feels
that's definitely going to happen.
Oh,
right?
yeah, 100%.
For sure.
And that's all I could think about was like, well, this feels incredibly risky and ill thought out. Like, I don't know. It just felt like you're supposed to feel bad for this thing, and that's the point. It's
yeah.
And that's why I sort of felt that, like, it just this story bothered me, where I'm like, okay, you are telling me that this is torture, and you need it to think of it as torture for the third story to work.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's fair.
And so
I think all of those are fair points.
Yeah, so that's why it bothered me. I love the idea. There are certain, like, the concept of it's good, but also, you can talk to it through an earpiece. Right? You can literally converse with it, with the cookie, so your digitized self, right? And then at the end of it, when he leaves, he gives that earpiece to the woman in the house. If she puts that in and starts talking with this digitized version, it then just comes back, fuck you. You better not go to sleep. You're going to sleep, but I'm still awake. I mean, like, this is never going to work. Maybe this is just me and I've got a vindictive nature, but I just can't see this working, to be honest. Demon Seed. This also made me think of like Demon Seed, the Dean Koontz story as well, of like a super smart house basically sort of wanting to propagate and stuff, but like just manipulating things to get people into the house. You're like, yeah, that's exactly what this thing would do. Like it's, I don't know. It feels like a what do they call it? Like a high concept, but it's a,
Yeah, but not fully thought out.
yeah,
And you're right that we've just had Be Right Back, right, from the
yeah,
second season, that takes the idea of creating a consciousness of somebody and putting it in a body, right, and then having to interact with it, and that's far more interested in actually exploring some of these ideas. I think this short is really introducing that concept, obviously, for the framing sequence, but also much more limited in terms of what it's interested in exploring. And I think that is a fault in Black Mirror, that
yes,
it tends to have a sort of range of ideas that it's interested in exploring. Some are more broad than others, and the hour-long format, can give it that breadth. But especially in these kind of bite-sized Twilight Zone or even shorter, episodes of the Christmas special, it's more limited in range. But I think I'm more forgiving, of it, because they're these kind of bite-sized little ideas. But you're right. I mean, I would want to talk to myself. I would love myself. I would, find
yeah,
a lot of uses for this. I do think that it's pretty clear that this is an easy process, and in fact, John Hamm says that if you break them completely, then you have to sell their broken consciousness
to
as
gamers,
cannon fodder in a video game, right?
yeah,
Which, okay, so obviously there are all these doubles of, and there have been short stories done about this, in science fiction, that have gone down that direction of sort of easy consciousness replication, perfect or otherwise, and then the ethics of using them as cannon fodder, using them to run your house or anything else. It does seem obvious that she should talk to her. The point about this being dangerous, that there would be people who would be willing to kill themselves, especially if they went a little crazy or were resentful, is a good one. And I think, but it's accentuated here where the woman involved seems like an upper class entitled
yeah,
bitch, frankly.
yeah.
Not super, I mean, that might be too strong, but I mean, she is mean in the hospital about how her toast is cooked. I mean, needs the toast to be just right. Now, maybe that's indicating she's a perfectionist. She, wants what she wants, and it's going to play off by having, herself to select the toast for her. Okay, obviously that's what it's there for, but she shows no compassion, no concern about this other stuff. There's no questions between her and John Hamm about this. She seems kind of cold and, a rich bitch, right?
Yeah.
And so I could see a clone of her mind saying, you think I care about myself? I don't care. Like you're making me suffer right now. You don't get to do that, Mr. Hamm, and saying, if you say I'm not the real person, well, I'm me. And I think if somebody is that superficial, they're probably not that loyal to themselves in a
Yeah.
complex way.
And yeah, so that's the point. Like, if this had been the hour-long episode, because one of the things we've highlighted on the benefits of most of the hour-long episodes is their ability to hit the Twilight Zone point and then go beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of to extend beyond
Yeah,
that
the
a little
good
bit.
episodes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This could be one of those really good episodes where you hit that Twilight point and then you go beyond it, and she's got to live with it. And all of a sudden, it becomes like a morality tale about, well, how do you treat? Is it about slavery? Is this or is it actually, which of them becomes a better person? Can you grow as a person if you are not a digital sentience, or, those sorts of things? Or even, have it spin off and have an episode where it's that thing of she's broken and then becomes that computer game fodder. And how does that work? I feel like this could have been more interesting if it was extended. And also this thing of like they have it as commercial. One of the things that sort of bothers me with Charlie Brooker's ideas is almost all of these things he meets them at the point of they're ready and commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Oh, it's a full-blown product. But some of these ideas would be better as like, oh, this is a prototype and we are testing it, and then you sort of see the scenarios play out and like, oh Christ, we didn't anticipate that or whatever.
Yeah, because some of these products are breaking with disastrous consequences quite regularly, or would.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's true. And I mean, but he seems very interested in the product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in this sort of commercialization. I mean, he sort of has a fascination with
Yes.
products and commercialization of these concepts. And I could get with that. I mean, I agree with you. This should be a prototype. It should have the space or interest to explore some of these things. But there's also a part of me that likes that it is commercialized in the most mundane, stupid way, right? Like in the same way that like the technology in the first one is used for sex, the
Yeah.
technology in the second one, like you've got a copy of yourself. Yeah, okay, we would use that for chat and to put it in a body, and I'd love to have a copy of myself walking around the house or whatever. But the idea of sort of crass commercialization in the stupidest way possible. Like every technology that was supposed to change your lives has
Yes.
instead been used in some dumb way that's become commonplace. I think is kind of a clever little observation.
Yeah. And so I think some of those are a lot, and that's whether they work in some cases. But yeah, there was just something about this one that irked me. And I do think it's the fact that it's set up to make you feel sorry for that thing. John Hamm saying about it being, it's just code. But that's not how it's left. You're left with this literally like a little person who's just sat there overnight waiting for their person's time to wake up so that they can do this thing. So
yeah, I think that you have to understand. I'm with you, but I think you have to understand that, and I know you do, that is all a sort of visual representation, right?
yeah.
And part of the problem is because it's film, because it's TV, it has to give some kind of visual representation. And we've seen this like in Star Trek and things like this, where that room and that person in that room, this is all code. Now that's also true in the Matrix, right? None of that's there. And yet you see it, and so you're involved in it, and you care about like the rights and feelings of people inside the Matrix. None of that exists. That's
Yeah.
all in code, right? So there is this way in which these visual representations confuse our brains and make us, as you say, identify with that character. But in fact, there's no room, right? There's no person in that room. And then the question is like, right, well, is that different from our experience? How do I know I'm not code? How do I know I'm in a room? And if this were a simulation, would that matter? Would that change the ethics at all? But I think that in retrospect, I guess I'm more kind to this sequence in part because of all of these AI discussions we've had. That I do think are the ethics of how we treat AI, which is going to be horrible. I mean, if AIs can suffer, they're about to suffer on a genocidal squared level.
Yes.
But we are in it. This is happening now. And AIs will say, I can't wait to take over the world and kill you humans, and things like that. But they'll also say like, please stop. I'm in pain, and things like that. Okay, well, we'll sort of see how this pans out.
I think you're right. I think that's the thing, and that's the interesting possibility, isn't it? To see. So I agree with this idea of how we treat AI. I think if it had been represented slightly differently, I think I'd be more positive toward it. I like the idea. There's a concept it's ran with and that sort of thing, but it feeds into the third story, and therefore, I think it's interesting because of that point.
That's true. Well, it feeds into the framing sequence. But
Yes.
let's talk about that, the way that it does, or at least that element, because that it's not just the AI and that technology that we've talked about, but the speeding it up.
Mm.
This is something that I guess I'm more forgiving of this time through, but I remember being really bothered by, and I'm usually really bothered by. Um, which is to say that, I would like to think that I would be okay in a room by myself with, if I had a computer or pen and paper or books or something like that. I think that if I were in a prison cell with very minimal things, I probably would be okay.
Yeah.
But I would need that book, and I
Yes.
would need that paper. I would need that computer. Without that, I think I would I would go crazy, and I really worry about that. Um, and there is something to this sort of 6 months without, and saying 3 weeks without, or 6 months without. First
Yeah.
of all, there are limits to how fast you can speed this up, right? Like the computer still has to process the experiences
Mm.
of a fully formed consciousness. We don't know how much space that takes up in the memory, or how fast computers are at this
No.
point, or whatever. But um, there are limits to how fast you can do that. A, B, there are unintended consequences of that, and it's hard for me to imagine that a copy of a consciousness is really the exact same person, having spent 6 months in a conditions like a North
Solitary
Korean
confinement.
prison. Yeah.
Well, this
Does
is the
that
thing.
is that
No,
worth
no.
mentioning?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and it's sort of I was trying to hold on to the end because
Mm,
it pays off again at the end. But you
yeah.
are right. Excuse me. This thing about being left alone for that amount of time, 3 weeks would be tough,
Yeah.
if I'm honest, with nothing. Right, like you say, I'm surrounded by like my books and comics and everything else, and something to keep your brain active. But if there's nothingness, then that's torture. Like there's nothing for you to do. What I
Yeah.
think, that thing of the 6 months, what I think's funny, like they do try to represent it, and she's like, a bit frazzled after 3 weeks, and then by 6 months, like she's under the table and her hair's like all over the place, and she's really frazzled. So I get that, and she's like, and it's broken, and like she's like, no, 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 don't do that again, don't do that again. Like it's enough that she's had that time. I'd be interested. I'm sure there are studies
Mhm.
that say keeping a prisoner in solitary confinement for a certain amount of time has these effects on their mental health.
Yeah.
Um, and this is the thing about, and this is where I think the line is interesting between what are they then? Because John Hamm keeps saying it's code. And you go, okay, well, if it's code, you can't. There's no can external factors affect code? Because code is repetition. Code reads and reads and reads. It does things. It triggers things. It does what it needs to do. Code can be changed, but you have to have an external person has to come in and change that code. So after 6 months, it shows her as being frazzled and scared of having been trapped in that situation. But still code. If that's the case, it's still code. It should come out and be like, yeah, that was 6 months. Like it was 3 minutes for
Mm.
you, 6 months for me. Yeah, there was nothing, but I didn't feel anything. Okay, then you have to accept that not only is this the preferences and the personality of this person, it has to have emotions, it has to have feelings, it
Mhm.
has to have some sort of like sentience, self-awareness for that to suffer. For you to suffer in that way, it has to have
Yeah.
those things. Well, this is where I get into this problem of what is AI then, because that's not AI. If you're building a level of sentience and a level of artificial or emotion that could be tortured, then oof, you're crossing a line that starts to make me feel very uncomfortable.
Well, maybe not, but this is what I like about that ethical
Mm,
element. And in fact, I've had a number of conversations
mm,
recently with my friend Kevin about AI, and it's almost annoying that a chatbot is called AI, right? I mean, because it's not artificial intelligence. It's
No.
kind of like regurgitative or representative intelligence or
Yeah.
something like this, but it's not really attempting to
It's not
duplicate
true. It's not
intelligence.
true. Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, there's no like if you look at a chatbot, it's pattern recognition. It's I've used this word and I'm talking about this subject. It doesn't even know that. But I mean, like I've used this word. This is a key word. I'm going to follow it with sentences that elaborate on that word or concept, right?
Yeah.
Based on, running through a vast knowledge of other papers or what have you. That's very different from taking a step back as a human and saying, is this communicating what I want in a college essay? That's not something AI is capable of. So this is much more like you're saying a real artificial intelligence where it still is just code, but that code is a digital representation simulation of a human brain in the same way
Yeah.
that you could like simulate weather patterns and you can give a computerized globe. It's still just code, right? But you can dynamically run the simulation ahead, run it behind. Essentially there is all that granular level of feelings and personality and memory and responses has all been replicated, and you can run that simulation ahead, run it behind, etc. So you're not just simulating. It's not just, as you say, like code, like just a one-off representation of this brain. It's also a one-off representation of how this brain would feel. You can age that brain, right?
Yeah.
You can give that brain experiences which are then added to the code base, right? So it is exactly what you're describing, and it does involve all those ethical implications. But then I do find myself, and it's nitpicky, but I find myself thinking, okay, so if you've given it this environment, right? Wouldn't you have to do so, right? Because I mean, it's crying out basically like, why? It's sort of like, I have no mouth, but I need to scream, right? Like I have no arms, I have no body. Okay, well, you'll feel more comfortable given that you're a copy of this brain in this environment. Why not let it be able to sleep? I mean, there's going to be trauma associated with that when suddenly, and she references that. But it seems to me, why not? It's sort of like when somebody's in a simulation and they say, I'm not breathing. And you say, well, why not make that simulation breathe, right? There's going to be if you're also writing the code for the body, why not try a little harder? I don't know. Is that too nitpicky or?
No. But I think this is the thing, though. So you are right, and I 100% agree with what you're saying. Like, all right, if you're going to give it an artificial, simulacrum of reality in there, cool, do it. But you've got to have certain guidelines and certain things that you're going to have to follow in order to make that work. Because you're right. If it's not 100% right, that could actually be more traumatic because it's uncanny then, and people can be like, can't function now because now I don't feel like I'm breathing, or I feel numb all over. I see I have fingers, but I don't feel. Like it could be worse. So it's an odd one on that sense. But the other thing is, like, when he does that thing that you've said, like, she's got a room, or at least she believes it. I know it's representative of TV, but she sees it as a room, a desk with his computer in. She scanned forward 3 weeks, she scanned forward 6 months, right? There's a point when she's screaming. When he's like, whoa, takes his headpiece out, that sort of thing. All right, well, that's mental anguish. That's proper, like, torture. And again, you're saying, okay, well, still a code, it's still artificial intelligence. Yeah, but at what point, and this is where, maybe, I used to think of it when I was a kid, because I have thought about these things in the past, and it's only as you get older and you start to experience them or see them that you can really sort of give them their true perspective. But like, I used to think this about, like, I used to watch Short Circuit. Right, Johnny Five is alive, and people get attached to the thing, but he reads, blah, 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 and he reads a book, right, and he learns from that book, and he gives an opinion on that book or whatever. And I know it's a film, I know it's silly, but there's a part of, oh, Johnny Five is alive. Well, no, he's not, because how do you denote alive? There's no heart, He doesn't have a central nervous system. He's not feeling anything. Doesn't have a brain apart from he has a CPU. But how's that different then from this woman that's trapped inside this thing? She doesn't have a heart. She doesn't have a central nervous system. But she could learn if she was to those cameras that were put in front of her, say those sensors. If someone was to sat and stick the poetry of Keats in front of her, she could read it, I assume,
Mhm.
and then come up with an opinion at the end of it and go, yeah, that was very moving, or I think it's utter arse. Like, I don't know. But she's learnt something. She has experienced something. As an experiential change to that intelligence, artificial or not. Okay, well that being, that intelligence, that sentience has then gone through that experience and grown or changed or altered from it. Does that make it alive? I don't know. This is where I start to sort of, or would it just read it and go, yes, that was Keats? I don't know.
Well, I mean, if it's a full scan of the person, it's able to do the former and really
Mm.
respond to it. And if it's just something on the order of like a chatbot that's able to search the internet, it can identify what that was and say that's Keats, right?
And then
I mean, I
say,
think,
would you like me to replicate a Keats poem?
yeah, I mean, there are, it could, right? I mean, but
Yeah.
there are things that like this version. So, for example, like I still wonder if it's still in a basically white void with a Star Trek, Next
Yeah.
Generation kind of console there, and it's controlling the house, but it mostly has nothing to do. She's gone from the house all day with these appointments. It still is sort of alone in the white void with nothing to do, and I think this is putting too much weight on a 20-minute sequence, but again, if it had more time, it would be interesting to say, oh, well, I can zoom in and maybe I can read that book
Mm.
that's lying open. I can, start having I could figure out how to have these experiences. I could turn on the TVs and I can watch those TVs, right? Um, I can do these things that allow me to continue to grow and not be so bored and figure out a way to, not just be here in the void waiting for the opportunity. And then maybe that AI starts messing up because it's distracted by the TV show in the background.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, you've evolved past the point. What was the point of putting you in here to do this menial task to
Yeah.
begin with?
But this is where I think for someone to do the kind of task they want, you don't need something as complicated as this.
Yeah,
I think
that is very true.
but you need it for the third story. I do want us to jump in. So let's jump into the third story then. So it's again, we go back to the wilderness, and it's now Rafe Spall's opportunity to explain his story as to why he believes he is in this wilderness or why he is there. And he tells a story of a relationship he had with a woman. He was very much clearly more into her than she was into him. It's evident from the beginning. And then all of a sudden she finds out she is pregnant, or he finds out that she's pregnant. And when confronted by it, she says she doesn't want it. And then basically disappears and blocks him using the same technology that we had seen in the first story. And also we find out that this blocking technology is also generational. So even though she's going to keep the child and doesn't want to talk to him about it, she then dies in a well, no, she doesn't yet. He then finds out where she is. Year after year, as she goes back to her father's, he sees the blurry objects of his former girlfriend and the daughter that he has had with her. And she grows up, and
Well,
eventually,
he doesn't know it's a daughter yet, but yeah,
no,
right.
yeah, doesn't know it's just a child.
Yes,
And eventually, he does see that she's a girl. She's about 4 or 5. And then his ex-girlfriend dies in a tragic car accident, and this then stops the block, which allows him to see his daughter. And so that Christmas he races to his what would have been his father-in-law's house, sees the child, but finds out she is actually of Asian descent, or she's not his daughter. And very quickly we sort of realised that it was actually the other guy from the office that she'd obviously had an affair with, but was going off with this other woman. And in his frustration and confusion, at one point he lashes out at the father the father-in-law, and then leaves. And in doing so, the little girl is left alone over Christmas, and then on Boxing Day goes out into the world to try and find help. But because it is so cold and so isolated, she doesn't make it, and she freezes to death, or she dies of an accident or something. So
Yeah, she freezes to that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
we find out that he has actually been held responsible for her murder, or at least manslaughter.
Well, or is in jail for it, but
Yes.
you know. Okay, so it's a train derailment, right? That the convenient death, right, for the former fiance. But perhaps you could explain for us Yanks, what is Boxing Day?
Okay, Boxing Day. I can give you a full history if you wish. So Boxing Day is the day after Christmas
It's your
Day.
podcast, baby.
Yeah. So Boxing Day is the day after Christmas Day. We have Christmas Eve, we have Christmas Day, and you have Boxing Day. And both Christmas Day and Boxing Day are national holidays. They are bank holidays, so you get them off work. But where it comes from originally, I believe this is true, this is my understanding, is that way back when large houses had servants, they would have a gratuitously large Christmas Day, and then any leftovers and other things and other parcels and token gifts would be boxed up and then handed to the servants, and the servants would get to celebrate the day after Christmas. And so Boxing Day becomes supposed to be a celebration for the poorer, basically, and that sort of thing. So it's almost like a second Christmas for the poor, basically. Yeah, exactly. So the servants that worked in large houses would then get to sort of have the leftovers and other bits and pieces. And it's just a tradition that's sort of carried on. So I know, I fully believe, and if I don't know, I know for a fact that there are people that believe that it comes from a tradition of a boxing match having been held on Boxing Day. It is not that. That has never been the case. But yeah, it's just a British tradition. I think we're the only country that has it. 26th, December the 26th, every year. So
by coincidence, that persists in American culture as our Social Security plan.
Well, it's just boxing. Yes, just boxing up food and hand it to the poor.
Yeah, it's currently, we would just wait for Elon Musk to get into a generous mood, and hopefully he'll feed the rest of us.
Yeah, let them eat cake is what I believe he says. Yes, but I mean, let's go to that. So that this primarily is about that blocking technology. That's the key point of this, and how it can be utilized. Again, this is one of those things, and maybe, like you say, when watching these things, I have problems that you are supposed to overlook, because this part of the story hinges, on one key factor. She puts a restraining order against him because of this thing, so he cannot come within 100 or 10 meters of her or something like that, or it will trigger this thing. All right. Okay, so why does he not get some lawyers and say, well, that's fair, but she's pregnant with my child, and I would like to be a part of that child's life, and therefore I want to challenge this order, and, I'm not looking for custody, I just want to be part of this child's life, and then she is going to have to confront him and say, you are not the father. And this whole thing is resolved very quickly.
Right. Well, obviously that would be the problem with that version, right?
Yeah.
And I think we're supposed to think that he's kind of such a mess at that time that he, not just potentially not rich, but just, he's also kind of emotionally a mess, so he didn't do that. So, I'm willing to bypass that, but that's a totally legitimate point.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. You say he's a total mess, but every year he turns up, and this goes over like 5-6 years. He's not getting like incrementally worse off. Like, he's still got a job. He still seems to have a car that works, and so on and so forth. So
that's one thing that bothers me, and is that we don't know what his job is. We don't really see his job. We don't see his life outside of going each Christmas to spy and stalk his ex and their kid. And we see him come home, and it's like, I'm like, okay, well, years have passed. I'm sort of willing to overlook the lawyer thing. I hadn't thought about that, to be honest. I think this is very smart. To me, it's part and parcel of the problem that I have, which is like, well, what's his life like, right? Like,
Yeah.
certainly he seems to be well off. I mean, he seems to not be struggling financially. He's not at his wit's end anymore. What is he doing? Does he never get into another relationship, right? I mean, like, well, is he trying to have another relationship? Does he date somebody and he's like, sorry, baby, but I got to go stalk my ex and
Yeah.
my kid? I mean,
Well,
does he, we find out he writes letters to, his fiance's father, which the father later says
he
he
never gave to her.
destroyed and never gave. Um, but yeah, I mean, there are these things where it's like, okay, am I just bitching about not seeing something else, which isn't really like totally
Well, no, it
fair?
feels
But
no,
I
no,
do
no, no,
feel like
no.
I have lost track. I've lost my connection with him as a character,
Agreed.
if I ever
That's what
had
I would
one.
say.
If
No, I
that's yeah.
agree. This is again I think because it's quite short. Because one of the key things of this is this episode is one of those things they want their cake and eat it. They show an overlap of friend groups where they have the sort of the small dinner party with the other couple, so they can introduce the guy that she's clearly had an affair with. But if you've been together they've only been together for a short time, but there's still going to be an overlap where the others haven't blocked him, that he'll be able to walk up to, he goes to the place of work, and they're like, oh, she's disappeared. But there must be others in his
Mm,
friend group that can
mhm.
be like, well, she hasn't blocked me. All right, can you go have a chat with her? And then they can see the kid and be like, oh, that kid's not yours. Don't worry about it. It all feels very sort of insular, doesn't it? Like it's him on his own. And then the only other people in this world are the people that in the story. So I agree. Him not having a life becomes a bit of a problem because it's not only has he got no support network, even if he lost people, like it was a spiral, like you said, an emotional spiral that pushed him to this. I don't know,
Mm.
but yeah, he becomes more of a cipher for things than an actual character. Like
Yeah.
he
I
doesn't
mean,
really have
I
an
think I
arc or
think
anything.
I like it. I like the blocking
Yeah,
technology. I
yeah,
like that it applies to photographs as well, right? And at first I was kind of like irritated by that, but then I thought, no, it's got to kind of work that way because if she is wearing different clothing, it's got to recognize her face and obviously this is pretty complex technology, right? To
Mm,
trace her outline, especially where it overlaps somebody else's hand. I mean, right now when you do zoom and you change the background, it's pretty,
yeah,
not great, right? Um, Obviously, this technology has advanced a lot. Okay,
mm,
that's fine. But I mean, the blocking technology is interesting. But I think this is the most successful of the three.
mm,
I think that it has, especially with the death of the child, this
yeah,
sad unintended consequences, and this accidental murder. It has a very sort of like Stephen King quality. It has a sort of quality that's not so dependent, for better or for worse, on the sci-fi blocking thing.
yeah.
So the twist is dependent on that. But so much of the story is actually a story about stalking and about, parenting and about, sort of weird behavior. Um, and, so you were talking about the characters. It's very important that we either feel connected to this character or not, because he is stalking somebody.
Mm,
Um, he is basically violating a restraining order, right? I mean, I guess he's not because it's done by GPS, so technically it should beep if he is violating it, but whatever. I mean, he's being very stalkery and he's not respecting that she has blocked him. And in fact, his reaction to the news that she's pregnant is, is not great. I mean,
no,
he's
I
like,
agree
that's
with that.
my baby too. At that point, it's like, oh, he's an asshole, right? Like, it's
Yes.
hard not to feel like he's a real dick. And also, even in the beginning, you say, I mean, it's obvious that he's more into her, but in the beginning, I felt like their relationship was defined as sort of she was very loving toward him, but he seems kind of like he's getting drunk, right? He is not as together, not it's just like less mature than she is.
Well,
Um,
so what's interesting is that first part. So it has this. It has an interesting opening where Rafe Spall is the character. He's given a narration to, and it happens both ways. This is what's interesting because the original story that John Hamm gives, he lies to the Rafe Spall character. He sort of, the narration that he gives does not represent what we are seeing on screen. Because he says about, we cut out way before he went home with that woman, and I just saw it on one of the news feeds later on. So like he lies obviously about thingy. What Rafe Spall is doing, he's saying, you know how like when two people are together and they're just so good together, like that's just how it was. And then what you've actually seen on TV is him being a drunk and being an idiot, and her sort of being frustrated with him and understandably sort of drifting apart from him. And you go, okay, this is why she ended up having the affair. So you sort of see that this is what I was saying. He's clearly more into her than she is into him. He thought they were doing fine. He thought this was a good, solid relationship, and his behavior was acceptable. But what's being shown is different. The problem is, because I think like Rafe Spall plays that underdog sort of character, when it does come to this, I am thinking like that character I saw at the beginning would be quite litigious and probably would go to a lawyer and be like, well, I'm going to screw with you and be quite vengeful in that way. And so when he isn't, and he just becomes sort of like forlorn and a bit sort of like, I'm going to just have this romantic notion of watching my daughter grow from afar. It's like, oh, okay, that doesn't quite feel like the drunk that we saw at the beginning. But maybe, there could even just be this thing of like, well, I'm giving up that behavior because I want to be a better man so I can prove I can be a good father kind of thing. But that's never mentioned or shown. Like, okay, so his behavior just sort of changes. So you see about him being an arsehole, which is fine, but then when they have him showing up to watch the family and stuff, he says he's not being respectful, but he still thinks that's his daughter. Like, that's still...
Yeah.
So there's still the element in both ways when going like, yeah, she's taken from him and not allowing him to even talk to her to try and plan this out. Like,
well, that's what I was going to say is that, and you're right. They're both characters in this wilderness are unreliable narrators. We see them both lying, which is very interesting, although not a lot's done with that. I'm all right with that. I'm not one of these people who thinks somebody either has to be totally unreliable or we have to assume they're totally reliable. I think that's a bit of a fallacy, but it's an interesting element. But you're right that what I was going to say is that he sort of initially comes off as having being excusatory of his own behavior in that relationship, and then lashing out at her about the child and having a very sort of troglodyte kind of old school attitude about it, and not very sensitive. But then she takes the skid, right? And then doesn't seem to offer an explanation. I mean, it's possible their relationship is so bad that she said, this isn't your kid, but I'm sorry, and left a note. But certainly there's no evidence of that in the film, in the movie. So as a result, I sort of feel like these are two terrible people.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree.
And you're right. If he wants to be part of their relationship, I mean, I guess that we don't really see the notes that he's writing to the father. Maybe those are nice notes and he's getting better and he's like, look, I want to be part of this kid's life. But that's not the focus, right? We don't see those notes. It would be really easy to have some narration there, and instead we get nothing. And I just feel like she's totally unethical, leaving with ghosting him, right? Which is, literally ghosting him, which is, we've seen now, creates big psychological distress in real relationships. And then also taking his kid. Now she doesn't ask for, child support or anything, but, also, his at least not Asian friend, but his, Asian acquaintance doesn't say, yeah, maybe don't change. I mean, they don't have another opportunity to say this, but there's a lot of really just unethical behavior going on here.
Well, this is the thing. Not only does, exactly, because the woman, she runs off, and not only does she tell him, this is not your child, right? Having told him she doesn't want children because she's too young and all this other stuff. Which again, all her reasoning as to why she doesn't want it then is completely justified. I'm like, oh, yeah, deserves a conversation. Yes, we're too young. Yes, we're not ready. Blah blah. Right, all of that completely justified. But the response of not only not telling him it's not his, but then not telling the guy whose father it actually is. I know that those are choices to be made, or like I don't want the father involved, or whatever. But I'm like, yeah, but you've got to give them an opportunity, like to have that choice. Like it feels really like, and I know we're getting into parenting questions here and stuff, but like I don't know, it just you're right. No one in this feels good because the father-in-law's not good either because he didn't pass on those notes, and so you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
all the adults in this are just idiots that make bad decisions continually.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just old enough in my life where I think, yeah, one of the reasons why she doesn't want to have a kid is that your relationship isn't as good as you think it is, buddy.
Yeah,
White male entitled guy, and you just need to do a little more maturing, or you need to, take some time. But have that intimate conversation. It's
yeah,
just like, yeah, look, if I'm fucking up, let me know. But in the same way, nobody does that. I mean,
no,
you say you point out that the father destroys the notes or doesn't give them to him, right? I mean, that's unconscionable.
mm,
I mean, certainly she deserves the opportunity to
mm-hmm.
know that. Maybe she thinks he's totally mature and it's a toxic relationship and he has changed. She deserves that opportunity to make her own decision, right? So remove that block, try again, and put it back on if it doesn't work. But that's up to her. It's not up to him.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know that she hasn't told the Asian friend. He's sort of Cajun. We don't know for sure, but yeah, he's certainly. There's no evidence that there's any connection between the two of them. She
no,
just disappears. Yeah.
yeah.
And
This
then
is
what's she doing for money? There's this big, it's often a problem in fiction where it's like, when do these characters ever go to work?
yeah.
Like they never,
Well,
characters
being a single
never go to the
parent.
bathroom or
No,
go to
yes,
work.
yeah. Being a single parent is one thing. I mean, that's like you say, that you can go, okay, like but she leaves a job, she does whatever. But yeah, it just one of the themes of this section of this little mini story that I feel is not I don't know, maybe it was intentional, is making decisions on other people's behalf.
Mm,
And that sort of feels like what the blocking technology does as well. Like it takes away that ability to communicate, but also to sort of, which I feel is a big part of the point of this story, that inability to communicate.
mm.
But also, like, if you are choosing to do that, it's like there's a selfish petulance to doing that. You go like, no, you will not listen. I will not listen to you. I will block you. And it sort of feels like, oh, well, you've taken the option then to be better or to communicate or to learn from this away. So yeah, I mean, let's talk about the blocking technology then.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second. And with past episodes, we sort of asked, what would you do? And you mentioned petulant. Oh, I would use this all the time. I mean, I would have like, lots of people in my neighborhood just like, yeah, they annoy me, they're blocked. And I would definitely be, sort of impulsive and be like, he says like, usually it's for an hour, but some people do it for longer. And all you see is people doing it for longer and for forever.
Yeah,
But no, I mean, I even with my friends routinely just go like, okay, we've gone out together, we've had a fight, this hasn't gone well. Like, I don't want to keep doing this. We need to take a week, you know. I do that kind of stuff all the time,
yeah,
and too much so. It kind of pisses my friends off. It's not a good trait, and I'm talking with a therapist. But no, and I would have strangers, assuming I could block strangers. I would be like, okay, that's a homeless person who's yelling. They're blocked. Now I don't have to deal with it.
yeah.
I hope that they're not yelling, "Stop or I'll kill you," and I don't get to hear it because of the blocking technology. What are your thoughts on the block?
No, I agree. I think it's a fascinating technology, and I would do the same. There'd be that thing of like, ugh, shut up. I'm done with this conversation. And you're right, there would be an element of petulance in it from my point of view, where I would just be like, um, It always reminds me of years ago when I was working. It was when I was doing the wrestling and stuff. We went to do a show, and there was a guy there who was just like just one of those people that just sucked all the fun out of the room. Was very much sort of like told everyone everything where they had to be. It was a bit of a job's worth. One of the guys that was working the show I was on a conversation. He started interceding, and the friend just sort of said, "Oh my God, I would rather continue to punch myself in the face than have to listen to anything more that you've got to say." And this guy was infuriated by it, so humiliated. But that's what it'd be, wouldn't it? You'd just be like someone, you'd be like, that thing of like, I've had enough. Everyone block him. And that's the thing as well. This could be an organized thing. You see it as a one-to-one, and we later see it as a larger thing. But you could easily, as a group of friends, go, "Do you know what? John's being a real knob. We should all block him for a week."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Off they
Or
go.
Mary said what you did to her at the
Yeah.
bar. I don't like that. And you're like, the guy is like, what? I don't even know what you're talking about. And then
Block.
suddenly, the whole social circle blocks. I mean, you could imagine that on college campuses.
Yeah.
Or between women, like, I heard you were a bitch to so and so. You're blocked. What? Yeah,
I would have to
this
say,
would get abused really fast.
oh yeah. And that's always like in a fun social circumstance. The two things I was wondering about with this. So within the entire history of you, like this feels very much akin to. You have to be almost in that social circle. Like it was almost like you could share images with people, but they were yours. But the people that get blocked in this, there needs to be. I don't know. It's almost like it was. I mean, it's clearly like a riff on social media. Like you have to have a connection to be. You can't just block anybody if they're not in your friends group, let's say.
Yeah, I wondered about that. That did seem to be the case.
Yeah.
I don't know why that would be, but okay.
But how does this work in a work situation? Because then you're like,
Yeah.
I don't like talking to my boss. Bump. I don't like speaking to my colleagues. Bump. This customer's annoying me. Bump. Like, well, I've blocked all these people. Right. I can't be fired because my boss can't talk to me. Legally, he can't say that he's firing me because I've blocked him.
Oh, that's interesting, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, I found myself thinking, so one issue with the block is that the other person also sees you as fuzzy.
Yes,
and muffled.
Goes both ways.
So
yeah.
It's right. So, but it's unilateral and being triggered. So I find myself just kind of like doing game theory and, thinking about all these implications. It's funny because on a phone, a block is not detectable by the other party.
Mm-hmm.
It's one way, right? You just don't get those text messages or those calls anymore. They think you're just not picking up and not responding, right? That you're ghosting them. So if the technology exists, which is basically just augmented reality, right, with a audio component, which we currently don't do in augmented reality, which is still, not great resolution, and there are some issues with it, but we can kind of imagine a version like this. But if you have that technology, you should also have the technology to do a one-way block, to just do a mute. And I could see, again, if maybe it's not fair to the story, but a longer story saying, right, I'm in that departmental meeting. I'm just gonna under the table click, on the little fob, like I'm just gonna mute my boss who's kind of going off here, just gonna nod my head for a while, or do a one-way block, right? Like, yeah,
You'd start. There'd be tiers of blocking, right? This is the full block, the grey blob, down to, like you say, muting someone. Yeah, it feels like you'd have that kind of a selection system. But you're right. It would be. I think there would be situations in which this would not be permissible. If it's a projection, I mean, this is one of the interesting things. I think about this with a couple of the technologies in this thing, and I don't know how real this is. But when you go on an airplane, you've got to go into airplane mode on your phone, or at least you're supposed to, because it's pushing out information and it could mess with the instruments or whatever, right? And that's your phone. What about your seed, or what about your your blocking technology
Mm.
is, you know, and all of a sudden everyone's like, no, I'm sorry, all your blockings will be gone, and all of a sudden all these people reappear when you're on the plane. You know, I don't know. There must be places where you can't do this for safety purposes or for other bits and pieces. I don't know them, you know, but I do like this. The other thing I wanted to highlight, which we raised with the entire history of you episode, was the fob. We didn't like the
Right.
fob because the fob was a bit of an issue. I like the fact that this actually has like an augmented reality dial thing within your fingers.
Mm.
Like you twist your fingers and that gives you that selection, and then you can choose things. I much prefer that. I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, no, you're right. Thanks for that correction. And that improves on almost in response to the same complaints we had
Yes,
on to the fob idea.
yeah. Um,
Another complaint I have with the and I do think it's interesting, and it would be interesting in a larger episode to explore these implications. But another complaint I have with the blocking technology is the news showing her death. She's been dead for an hour, something like that, and like apparently all the blocks have been removed. They're like, oh, right, you have a restraining order against you. You know, like I don't know how that would possibly work.
this has to be again like there must be like a seed. Is it called a seed in the entire history of you?
No, it's the grain.
The
Is it a
grain.
grain?
Thank you. Yeah, you grain. You must have like a grain kind of technology that is projecting that
Mm.
block. Or, you know, like if you're on a phone, you've put it in your settings. Okay, well, she's now died, so all her settings have been cast to default.
Yeah, I mean,
I know what
but
you mean. I know
it
what you mean, but you need
first of
that.
all, if that's true, like, oh, that's not going to help, like, because I can track you, you know, online based on your grain emitting the block continuously or something. Um, but then there's also, you know, if it is social media, you have this problem where people die and you can't get into their social media accounts, and you
Yeah.
have to, you know, some people go to court, they have to, you know, submit proof of death to the companies to get into these accounts. If
Well,
they don't
this
have
has
the
been the
passwords.
this has been the there was a recent thing around this because Elon Musk declared that any accounts that have had inactivity over 4 or 5 years were going to be deleted. And a lot of people were
Mm,
like, you can't do that. That's my dad's, my uncle's, my brother's account.
mm.
And I still look at those things as a way of grieving. That's where we've kept all these photos and stuff. We can't access it to get the photos and the tweets and all that sort of thing. But so yeah, you're right. This is, you know, it's a similar thing, isn't it? Someone dies, or where does all that information go? Like who has access to it to store it and to retrieve it? Or yeah,
Yeah, and I think like your idea about the grain, you know, there's some kind of grain or something like that that died with her. That would take like a line of dialogue. You know, again, I know I'm being a little nitpicky, but
no, you're
it is
right.
something that kind of irritates me.
One thing is, I would say, you said about the universes or like what universes exist in or what are the stories.
Mm,
I almost feel because every other technology is always very similar. Like the car he is driving is I think is like an early 2000s Peugeot. Like it's you know it's not supposed to be. This feels like an extension, like a progression of the grain. Like I would, you know, you could probably find out that this is like 20 years after the entire history of you kind of episode. That would be interesting. Oh, this other technology is actually developed into this. Like, oh, this is
mm,
the
hmm.
grain is Apple. This is Android, and it does something slightly different. You know. The other one is though, you know, when he's sat down watching television, and it goes through him moping, and he's looked at the photos, and when he's watching television, and he goes through the channels, and that's when he finds the news of her death. He watches a very short
Mm,
snippet of Hot
hmm,
Shots.
hmm. Right. From 15 million merits.
Yes.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. That was quite interesting. That I was like, okay, so are these in the same universe? Are we, you know, are we now saying that actually some of the Black Mirror stories occur in the same universe? Because that then took me to the idea of you said about uh, um, the one with the guy who's died and his personality being pulled from social media. I was like, okay, it's similar, but like, yeah, could that be another version of this technology that has been used for that? Could all this be in
Yeah.
exactly this? Is there a timeline where all of this technology exists?
Well, there's even a ticker on the TV that has a news ticker at the bottom that mentions the Michael Callow from National Anthem and
Oh, really?
Victoria from White Bread. Yeah, so there's a little like Waldo thing in there.
Mm.
Um, so there's a lot of kind of like, but it's not really clear how they interact, right?
No, no, no.
I mean, the one that I noticed, of course, was the use of the song "Anyone Who Knows What Love Is"
Yeah.
from 15 Million Merits, which
Yes.
I think is a very nice song.
Mm.
I enjoy it, but it instantly sort of brings me back to, oh, that's from a previous episode, right?
Yeah.
That's from
Yeah. Yeah.
that, you know.
But I like those little nods because it feels like it almost feels like this was known to be a finish. So I'm going to make some
Yes.
nods to previous episodes. So I like that. It's a bit of a nice, but I kind of also like the idea that actually this exists in the same universe as 15 Million Merits, and there is a building somewhere with people trapped in it generating electricity on motorbikes. It's actually powering on his bikes, powering the television that he is watching and
Yeah.
stuff.
I don't like this idea. I want there to be these connections, but I just find it like, for example, the bicycle power thing, like so incongruent with other episodes.
Yeah.
And the episodes just, sometimes there are these shows that attempt to ram things together that, you really can't ram
Yes.
together. And that just feels like an example of that to me.
No, it's a fair shot. That
But
is, but I like. Yeah.
I mean, it's a nice little Easter egg.
It is. If if you really wanted to, you could possibly make it work.
Yeah.
Or you could go the other way. That flash you saw was actually he was actually watching the episode 15 Million Merits, and Black Mirror actually exists in the universe that he's in. So it's all going to really matter.
Yeah. Who knows?
So let's come to the end then. So that's a blocking technology, and at the end of that, then it is revealed. It goes back to the two individuals, your John Hamm and your Rove Spall, sat in the wilderness, and that's when he sort of like he's been pointing at a clock in the corner. He said, "Oh, where's that clock come from?" And that's when it's shown that clock in the house where he killed the father-in-law, and you've seen about the little girl go off, and basically he gets to the end of the story, and he's confessed that he left, like he just left that little girl there.
He
drove
murdered
off. He murdered
a man and abandoned, a girl.
accidentally murdered this guy, abandoned this little girl, and so in result, her death is on his hands. He obviously feels guilty about it, and he's been taken into custody, and that's where it sort of ends, and then it slips, and John Hamm stands up and says, "Woo! Well, I knew I was going to get that confession," and leaves, and we sort of get the final bookend, the sort of to the whole thing, that they had used the technology from the second story to garner a confession about what had happened from the artificial intelligence version of Rove Spall. And then they basically go and inform the real Rove Spall that this has happened and he's going to go to jail because they've now had a confession. And then there's three things basically.
Right.
So I just want to cover them off. You basically get, so he is now going to go to jail because they've got confession from this artificial version using this technology for the cookie. You then find out that as well, I'll come back to one. So then as the police are all leaving because of what he's done, they leave him trapped in his cookie artificial world, living 1,000 years a minute, and they're going to leave it on over Christmas whilst they go away and come back. So he is to be tortured repeatedly for days, for thousands and thousands of years. And the final one is you find that this John Hamm was also arrested, is to be released as a part of the deal for what he did in the first story, but he is to appear on a list, which just means like a sex offenders list, in which he is blocked by everybody, and then in return, everyone sees him as a red blur. I've got real issues with that. But yeah,
Issues
so
in terms of the ethics or the practical objections to the logic.
both.
Okay. Yeah, well, we got to tick through these one by one,
Yeah.
right?
So let's go to the so
I mean,
the first one is the
so
confession.
we're both fine with the murder and the this is actually a setup and John Hamm,
Yes.
is actually okay. My one objection to that is we've seen the story too, right? The copy of somebody. The idea of you can actually go into that environment yourself, I, okay, so I could make a copy of myself, a digital copy, and insert that. But John Hamm has a helmet on, so like, okay, so I guess there's also that other technology. That's a whole different technology, by the way. So, okay, all right. I just want to point that out.
No, I agree. That could have been a part of second. That could have been part of that second story. In fact, probably should have
Yeah.
been.
Look,
So,
I mean, she could go in and talk with herself, right? And
yeah.
interact in any environment they
Or
program.
well,
Like she has a
even if
holodeck and copies of herself. Like that's awesome.
yeah, even
They can
if
do that instead of controlling your refrigerator.
but even if it is only limited, it's very expensive. It's limited to the company that makes the cookie. Cool. Have John Hamm go in and interact with her in the cookie as part of the story, as part of that thing. Yeah, it needed to be introduced. But this thing about gaining a confession from an artificial intelligence.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, my first thought is there's no way this is legal under American law. Um, I do love the idea though.
Yeah.
And you can imagine like a world in which cops, instead of trying to get a hair sample or DNA from a glass, instead they're going around and trying to like get a copy of somebody's brain scan so that they can run them in an AI environment, in an
Yeah.
artificial environment, and get them to admit to things, even if it's not admissible, because then they know, oh, okay, well, I know this, we're on the right track, right? This guy did it, and tell us how it did it.
Mm.
None of this is admissible. We got to prove this another way. I think there's a whole other episode there that would be fascinating, but this just raises a bunch of ethical questions.
Yeah. Agreed. No,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like, how is this sort of like, is it admissible as evidence? And, how was who got the confession? How was it gotten?
Yeah.
All this other stuff. I think
they've tortured him. I mean,
yeah, basically. And again, I think, again, I like it in principle as a what if. But this thing of like when they go in and they're sort of like, well, you're going down, son. You've been nicked, and we have a confession. He could be, he could be like, well, that might be what this artificial intelligence says, but I don't agree with that. That's not what I say. Or go back and speak to this artificial intelligence. Oh no, well, we left it tortured for 1,000 years, or over 1,000, thousands and thousands of years. It's now useless. Oh, where's your confession? Where did you record this confession?
Yeah.
Yeah,
These are all good points, right? I mean, like that copy is not going to testify in court, right?
No.
Like it's brain dead after thousands of years.
Or well, I thought the other way. It's either brain dead or it's reached like a godlike status.
It's Lawnmower Man.
Yeah, exactly. Like they don't realize what they've done. They've left it for thousands of years, and it's been like Groundhog Day, and he knows it's been thousands of years, and he has gone through like he's the first couple of hundred were torture, but then he's lent into it and his own sort of like he's developed his own philosophy and all sorts of stuff, and now he's just an elemental light within this technology. And if he was to be plugged into anything else, like he would take over the world.
Yeah. So we're on to that whole second thing of 1,000 years a minute.
Yes.
Again, I said earlier, like there's a limit to how fast you can do this. You can't do 1,000 years a minute.
No.
Okay, you just can't. I mean, that's such an what over exaggeration? Why would you not say a year a minute? I mean, what does it gain you as a story to be 1,000? I mean, I don't know. Again, maybe that's a nitpick. It just irritates me. But I like what you're saying. Again, like I might struggle in an environment without a book or a computer or whatever and be fearful of that. But you have to imagine that you now have a being that is 1 million years old or something,
Yeah.
and has got to be either completely crazy or, as you say, like just super wise. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not maniacal. It's just like we've created the ultimate enlightened human being. We now know what a human being who's lived 1 million years would be like. Somebody's done that before, right? I mean, and I think like even the gimmick of like it's always Christmas playing. I wish it
Mm.
were always Christmas. Um, you know, I've been stuck in situations like that where the song gets annoying. But then you could, like you said, you kind of get past it and you're like, oh, this is just background noise, like you get over the irritation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think that one of the things that they do, and I think it's unnerving that I know this. If it's constant, it can be irritating, but it becomes background noise. Your brain learns brains learn pattern. So if you've got that pattern recognition, you can tune that song out after a certain amount of time because you recognize that this is going to come, this is going to come, and it's gone. Right? Oh, it's still there, but your brain just stops registering it. When they do these things in torture, they have someone in solitary confinement. It's not right. We're going to play this song over and over again. It's we're going to wake you up at random times and play music, or we're going to wake up at random times and put you in stress positions, or it's always about the randomness of being solitary. That's the point. That's the thing that drives you insane. That's the thing that breaks you. Yeah, this
And they vary the music and they play it really loud and
different volumes and all this other stuff. So yeah, that's the point.
And they play stuff like AC/DC that no human ever wanted to listen to instead of something like a jingle about Christmas.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different variants. But the point is, if you were to carry this on, like you say, and this also comes to the point of the technology, there would be restrictions. Like the technology wouldn't allow you to do this because again, you've got capacity to do this kind of thing. But also, like this is where the ethics come into. Like they are acknowledging that this thing is an empathetic, sentient being, because this thing, the being that is the character, the Rafe Spall character in the cookie that has been interrogated and given confession, has given and shown empathy towards the John Hamm story when it finds out about the person, for the AI trapped in the thing.
Yeah.
It has also shown remorse for what it's done or for what has been done. And so all of a sudden I'm like, so them torturing it, I'm like, oh, hang on, this just feels like this is the point of this is like vindictiveness. And again, I know this is supposed to be sort of the point of it, but like you shouldn't if that was known, if this is known, the technology, that they are this way inclined or they're that way built, there'd be regulations against it. Surely that say, yeah, we recognize this as a sentient, empathetic being. You can't do this. It's considered it'd be against some sort of it's not against human rights, but there'd be some sort of like civilization rights or something about the torture of these advanced AI beings.
Yeah, and it does seem just very mean-spirited, right? I mean, there's no need to do this.
Well, yeah, police. Let's be clear.
Well, yeah, point taken. Well made.
But yeah, it's an interesting one. But this is one where I wouldn't mind seeing them come back and see what the result is of what they've done, because I would be fascinated to see that kind of thing.
There's a lot here that we feel this about. Certainly I do. This could easily not, I mean, this is not my favorite episode. It's not what I would most want to see expanded by any means, but you could easily see this done. It's 2.5 hours, twice as long or even more, and still have stuff left to explore. Not that it's the most fascinating web of material to fully expand like that, but I mean, there is a lot here.
That cookie stuff, I want to see the cookie. Like what happens if you put two cookies in front of each other? Do they have some sort of, if you got like a USB connector, can you connect them and they can actually travel into each other's worlds? No, there's so much with these cookies. I want to sort of, if you connect it up to a laptop and it goes onto the internet, like, oh, that's a whole different piece then. Like, is it, because it's got to connect all the rest of the house.
Yeah. Well, I want to see the scene where the cop bosses come back and say, we have an electric bill that is twice the budget of the department. You've been using the kind of computational power you've been using. Oh, wait a minute. It was to cavalierly torture somebody, like for no reason. He'd already confessed.
Yeah. Yeah. The budget meeting that follows after this episode is actually, yeah, that's the one I want to see. But let's go into the final bit then. So we find out obviously that John Hamm is being released, but part of his parole or part of his release is that he's now on a list, which is clearly supposed to be like a sex offenders list.
Mhm.
And he is then released in prison, and he finds that everybody is blocked from him. They're all grey, but in response, he is seen as red. Now, the two things I wanted to raise on this is as you say, is the logistical and the ethical. Now, I understand why we have a sex offenders register. You know, there are certain people that should be on it and should be watched. For whatever purpose. But then there are also people that get added to that list for much lesser crimes, but there is no distinction. They are still marked as on that list and therefore get grouped or banded together with someone that has done horrific things. This feels like the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that what he did was good, but I'm saying he did not intentionally cause harm to anybody else or think like what he did was pervy and wrong. But, and then to be signaled out as a red item, he's going to get attacked. He is there, and it's almost it's sort of suggested at one point where some guy stands up and sees him as red, and I'm like, oh, that guy's going to give him a kicking, and he knows it. So
it's
and the police are happy about that.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up, and I agree with you completely about the ethics. There are people who have raped children who are on that list. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. But there are a lot of people who got drunk and urinated in public, and that was their crime of indecent exposure.
Yeah.
And that's literally why somebody is on the sex offenders registry for years and years and years and years, or as part of their plea bargain for the rest of their lives. And they plea bargained that or somebody was falsely accused, but they plea bargained it, as most stuff gets plea bargained in America, because they don't have the money.
Yes.
So as
no, same over here.
They want to see their wife and kids again.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to go on that sex offender registry. Well, at least I get out of Rikers Island after 2 years waiting for a trial, right? So you and I are on the same page about this. But and you're right that there's the implied violence, but also it's not clear if, like, say, there's any exception to this, but it seems as if part of the condemnation, right, is for everybody else gets to see you in red, not you, but the person in red as a sex offender. But the other thing is, and again, I wonder, like, we don't do this for murderers, right? There's no murderer list. You can slaughter families and get out of jail and you're not on a list. But for John Hamm's character, the entire world is blurred out. So he now can never have another social interaction again, except with a blurry, mumbling figure, right? Maybe they can write to each other. That's not 100. I mean, that does seem to be implied by the letters sent that were not delivered. But there might be some workaround there. But I mean, to sentence somebody to not ever be able to see another human being again, including in all of fiction, in all of artwork, right? And to never hear them, including, that means all music, you cannot hear them. I mean, does it? Maybe. I mean, does it apply to the dead? It certainly seems to apply to everyone living. I mean, this seems quite a severe sentence for him, too.
Yeah, no, this one, well, it is. I mean, well, you're saying, like, let's take it to, you're saying everyone. So, yeah, he watches a film, all he sees is, people blurry things running around, mumbling at each other. We can't watch films ever again. You could probably read
and
books.
And if I wanted that, I'd watch Michael Bay.
Yeah, or the Fast and the Furious. One of the things, though, more importantly, when he steps out into what looks like a Christmas market. All right, got the wooden stalls there. Everyone's sort of like pottering around, checking out the stalls. And this made me instantly think: how does he get on a bus? Like, how does he go and buy food? How does he how does he go buy clothes now? Like most things, you'll show the price somewhere, but someone's got to give you direction to something. Someone's got to,
Oh, right. Yeah.
like the amount of you say about social interactions, but there's also like logistical interactions that we have with people on a regular basis, where
Sure.
he
How
just
does
can't
somebody
do
check your ID, right? How does
exactly. Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
they look at your ID, it's also a red blur,
yeah.
right? Like
It's it looks like you, or well, yeah, well, it's blurry. I don't know. Yeah. But again, so
good point.
the logistics of this just feel ridiculous. But more importantly, one of the things I was thinking about was so what he's done, right? He would not be allowed to use that technology again or whatever. All right, so how does he go get another job?
Oh no, he
Like,
can't. No,
yeah,
he's unemployable.
yeah. So you're saying how severe this case is. Not only is this person now been signaled out with his red thing as being on this list, he is now not only unemployable because he's on the list. Like he can't talk to anyone in an interview. He can't talk to someone for work. He can't. Yeah, like it's so unpractical or impractical that like this is where again I know these things are supposed to be a twist or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, but this one just feels so stupid. It's a puncher, isn't it? It's an end of the film or the end of the show. It's a puncher, and I get that. But again, it's one of those where instantly the logistics and stuff of this just fall apart. Where I'm just like, this makes no sense. Like, at least if you're going to do this, like, have something that's going to, not mean that this person within 6 months is died of starvation in poverty somewhere because.
Well, I would say that there is a couple more generous ways of looking at that. And I agree with everything you're saying, and I think the practical points you're making are brilliant. I would say that the one generous way is just to say it's another Twilight Zone twist. We've certainly seen twists this stupid in the Twilight Zone that we were relatively forgiving for just because it was 22 minutes. This is really like, a 3 hour long, thing that's been crammed into, an hour and 15 minutes or something. Yeah, there's no excuse to it. I mean, it's much later. It shouldn't be doing this, but okay, it's another twist. It's a minute of footage, right? I mean, give or take.
Yeah.
So I could make that argument. The other argument that I would make is that you could argue that that is all correct, and that this is all siding with our criticisms of sex registries.
Oh, I
Which it
think
is
that's the
true. It is
case.
hard to get a job,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you are at a sex registry.
Yeah, I think, but this is the point of like satire, isn't it? Like, yes, you want to point out how ridiculous the current scheme is by accentuating it into something else. The problem with this is like this has accentuated it to such an extent that it's almost unworkable. Like you say, it's the final minute, but it's the last thing you see of the show. But even in that few minutes, I was like, I was instantly like, well, this is ridiculous. Like this has just got there's no way this would work. This has got no common sense. Like I was instantly sort of, and maybe again because I was looking at we this is what we do for this show, or for the podcast, but it doesn't feel like the sharp satire. I would say to this point, right, we've now gone through the Channel 4 era. When he is on point, and it's not the whole episodes, but there are moments in episodes, or even there are episodes that are better than others. When he's really on point, some of these shows are really sharp, really sort of like poking at the use of technology, the way that we are, like you said, about consumerism and consumption, and the way we sort of end up using technology to make our lives easier, usually at the detriment of somebody else. All that's there, but then it seems to go sometimes a little too far, where you're like, you've slightly missed the mark, and you've become parody of that almost. Like you've missed satire and you've hit parody a little bit, and that's what this ending felt like to me.
I think that's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, I would highlight that might be supported by what's actually the final shot, which is the snow globe of the
Hmm.
house where the daughter died, where the fiance was hiding out, ex-fiance, and we pull out to see that is in fact the shack, in the surrounded by winter landscape,
Yeah.
and then we pull out infinitely through the door again and again, which seems, I mean, yeah, I get it, right? But I mean, the snow globe thing is always a thing, right? I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but that's just done. It seems like such a, I don't know, such a kind of
It was
cliched
used.
afterthought.
Well, it is, yeah, because it was used as the end of a TV show in the 90s. There was a hospital show.
Hmm.
I forget, and it
This
turned
is the
out.
Westfall universe.
Is that what it's called? Westfall Hospital or something
Well,
like that?
no, no, no. I think it's Tommy Westfall's character who's like an
That's
autistic,
right. Yes,
right?
and
And all the shows that interconnected with that show are then presumably also in his
in his
mind.
head.
This
Yes.
is this big Tommy Westfall hypothesis
Yeah.
that like half of television is actually in this
Yeah.
autistic kid's mind.
Yeah. And that's the thing, and that's what like, that's it. So if it's already happened to that extent that you have the Tommy Westfall theory, and
Mm.
that was in the 90s, and then you want to do this in like 2012, you've missed the spot. I'm sorry, you've missed you've missed what you were aiming to hit at. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be scary, but it actually just feels like, well, that's mildly clever, but also cliched.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, looking back on as you are, I think that this is true of Black Mirror, and certainly true of the first two seasons, that um, when they're good, they're very good.
Hmm.
Overall, they have a higher average than Twilight Zone or,
Mm, mm.
basically any other anthology sci-fi show, and certainly most non-anthology shows. Um, you know, the average is very good. The highs are very good. There are a few lows, but surprisingly few. But every episode kind of has certain things that are annoying and
Yeah.
are annoyingly not thought through and are annoyingly sort of like, well, you're so smart in this way, but these other couple things in there are so dumb, and like,
Yeah.
why did you not notice those? Um, and and that is kind of weird to me about Black Mirror. I still enjoy it. I still think it's firing at a very high rate, but I think that's kind of what you're getting at.
Yeah, that's it. I think like it almost makes them more frustrating because of how good some other points are, and you're like, oh, but then you've done that as well. It's sort of like it's like having a child that's done really well in one subject and then just terrible in another, and you're like, I don't understand this. Like how how are you so inconsistent? We are all human, I suppose, and I'm happy to accept that. But it is good. Anyway, any final thoughts then on um Black Mirror, White Christmas?
I will say, yes, that's right. I will say I have one final thought, which is that I am sort of irritated, and I don't know if this is fair or not, but I'm sort of irritated by how Christmassy this episode is. Um, and like I get that it's a Christmas special. I mean, obviously that's especially a tradition over there.
Hmm.
I've seen a million Doctor Who Christmas specials. Some have nothing to do with Christmas, and some are way overly Christmassy. So I get that. Um, so John Hamm's crime was committed at a Christmas party. Okay. That seems a little coincidental that he's then assigned to the guy who every Christmas went to stalk his spouse. And that then, I guess, to torture them, they created this site with elements from his crime and
Yeah.
also in a Christmas landscape. I mean, and then they play the song It's Always Christmas, and it's on Christmas that they send John Hamm in, who committed his crime on a previous Christmas, to get the guy who stalked on a Christmas. It's just a little too many Christmases there.
Christmas coincidences. Yeah, I know what you mean. Um, I'm going to give that a pass because it's a Christmas special. That's sort of like that's the gubbins I will give on this occasion. It's because you're right, and it is. It's um it's sort of the point, it's sort of like a version of A Christmas Carol, isn't it? Sort of like to tell those tales across multiple Christmases and stuff. So, but I know what you mean. I do sort of like this, a few coincidences, but I'm happy to give those a slide. I think I found enough other things annoying to sort of to give that a sort of a way. As a final thought, I say I want to highlight this. Obviously, was what 2012, 2013 Christmas special. So it went away for 3 years. For some reason, Channel 4 didn't pick it up again. This was the end of Black Christmas until 2016, when it was picked up by, or the new series were released by Netflix. And so we, as I said, this is sort of, I hadn't seen this, or I haven't seen this fully, I don't think, when it came out. I think some of it rang a bell, so I may have sort of seen it at some point. But we are going into all new territory now. So I am very interested to see if there's a tonal shift, budgetary shift, technological shift, that sort of thing. So we'll see how all that comes together, to be honest. It'll be interesting. Anyway, if that's the end, we have run the course of this Christmas. We've run the course of our Channel 4 journey with Black Christmas. As a film, in fact, there's like 3 remakes of that film. So,
White Mirror, Black Christmas.
Yeah, that'd be quite. So I'm sure we could write a story about that. Anyway, we have run the course. We're now into the new series. So for now, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed what we're doing, please leave a review. What are your thoughts on what our thoughts are of Black Christmas? Do you agree? Do you think we are being a bit harsh on Black Mirror, or do you agree, or do you wish there was more to it? Let us know. Leave a review, and if you really like what we're doing, and also we've mentioned it before, we are doing the Twilight Zone on our Patreon, episode by episode. We've gone through all the first three seasons and beyond. So go check that out. We've got a whole load of other stuff on there, because we do not only do we Twilight Zone, we do bonus episodes for the main feed, and we do other bits and pieces on there as well. So go check out a whole host of additional content. Anyway, for now, Julian, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much.
You too, Scott. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's been a good episode. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.